All right, let's get right into it. Today we're looking at a pretty remarkable story pulled directly from a leader's own account. It's all about how a single personal conviction can blossom into a full-blown global movement. And it's a journey that's packed with personal revelations, huge struggles, and some pretty incredible growth.
So the whole thing kicks off with this really bold claim. The speaker argues that belief isn't just a thought, something in your head. No, they're saying that when a belief gets strong enough, it becomes a real, tangible force, something that can actually physically change the world.
So, where did all this start? Well, we have to go back to 1981. This is where the speaker points to a profound, life-altering moment that basically changed everything for him. He says that these weren't just fleeting thoughts or ideas. He describes them as a steady stream of heavenly messages. And this wasn't a one-time thing. It was a process that went on for more than 5 years, forcing him to totally reevaluate his entire life. All of this led to a pretty stark realization. He felt like his life balance sheet was deep in the red. He'd spent decades just taking from his parents, from society, from the world, without really giving anything meaningful in return. And that feeling is what pushed him to leave a very stable corporate career and set off on a completely new path.
Now, what's really fascinating here is that this huge life decision wasn't met with applause. Not at all. In fact, pretty much everyone was against it, and he describes the reactions in really vivid detail. Can you imagine? He remembers his coworkers at his big trading company literally begging him to tell them it was all a joke. They just couldn't process it. The guy they ate lunch with and saw every day was suddenly claiming he could hear the voices of major figures from history and religion.
And it wasn't just his colleagues. His own family was deeply concerned. They were worried he was throwing away this incredible future, maybe getting lost in some ideas about the afterlife that his late father was interested in. They thought he was losing his grip on reality.
So, you see the choice he was up against. It was a massive fork in the road. On one side, you've got headhunters calling, offering him jobs with double, even triple his salary, a secure, respectable, successful life. And on the other side, this deeply personal, unproven spiritual calling with absolutely nothing to its name. No money, no building, no followers.
Okay, so how does this solo belief, something everyone told him was crazy, actually turn into a real organization? Let's look at how it all started. As you can see from the timeline, this was not an overnight success story. It actually took 5 full years from when he first started receiving those messages in 1981 to when the very first public meeting was held. But from that point on, according to him, the growth was just explosive. He tells this fantastic story to give you a feel for the energy of that first gathering. It was held in a tiny hall meant for less than 90 people, but it was so jam-packed with people who had come from all over the country that he, the main speaker, couldn't even get in the front door. He literally had to climb along an outside veranda just to get onto the stage.
And get this, from that one chaotic, overflowing room, the organization now claims it has grown to over 10,000 branches and missions all around the world. I mean, that is just a staggering jump from where it all began. But as the organization grew, its mission started to expand way beyond just spiritual teachings. The focus began shifting towards influencing society itself through politics, education, and culture.
According to the source, this was a totally deliberate strategy. The idea was to approach society from all these different angles. He does admit, though, that this shift confused a lot of his early followers, who were really only there for the spiritual message.
Now, this is where the founder makes some really significant claims about the group's global influence. He alleges that his international headquarters was actually in touch with Donald Trump's inner circle, way before he was even elected president. And he doesn't stop there. He goes on to claim that this influence reaches all the way to the Kremlin. The speaker alleges that President Putin's government isn't just aware of his organization, but is actively studying its spiritual readings. It suggests a kind of quiet, behind-the-scenes impact on world affairs. So, what's the endgame here? What's the ultimate goal of all this growth and influence? Well, the speaker lays out a very clear, very ambitious vision for the future of the entire world. He breaks it down into a 3-part global mission. First, to unify the world's major religions by showing they all come from the same source. Second, to use that unified spiritual understanding to solve major global conflicts. And third, to tackle what he sees as the root problem of modern society, materialism. And here, he brings it all back to that central theme with this really powerful image. He says that the collective power of belief can act like a laser beam, cutting a tunnel straight through what he calls the mountain of agnosticism,
all the modern skepticism and doubt that he thinks is holding humanity back.
And that brings us right back to the central question of this whole story. It's more than just the tale of one organization. It's a fascinating look at how a personal conviction can actually start to manifest in the real world. It really makes you wonder, at what point does a belief stop being just an idea in someone's head and become a force that can truly start to shape our reality? That's a powerful thought to leave you with.
Love, it's a huge topic, right? We use that word every day. But have you ever really stopped to think about what it actually is? Well, that's what we're diving into today. We're going to explore what our source material calls the problem of love. And believe me, it's a journey that takes us from our most basic instincts all the way up to our highest ideals. You know, the author of our source material kicks this off with a really beautiful thought. It frames love not as some static thing you just find, but as something that's constantly changing and evolving right along with us as we go through life. So what are we really talking about here? Is love just a feeling that comes and goes? Is it just our biology doing its thing? Or is there something much deeper, something way more profound going on? That's the big question we're trying to get to the bottom of. All right, so here's our roadmap for this exploration. We're breaking it down into 5 parts. We're going to start with that raw, fundamental hunger for love, then we'll get into all the messy complications. After that, we'll see what happens when you throw group dynamics into the mix. Then we'll talk about how love has to mature through wisdom and forgiveness. And finally, we'll get to love's ultimate challenge, transcending hatred. Okay, let's jump right in. The very first stage is what our source calls the hunger for love. You can think of it as our most primitive, instinctual starting point, something we're all basically born with. And it unfolds in a really fascinating way. It all starts with this simple, powerful desire to be loved. But then it evolves. We start to want to monopolize that love, right? To be someone's special one, their only one. And that urge, weirdly enough, becomes this incredible engine for self-improvement. It's what drives us to be better, to be worthy of that affection. And this is a really key point. This isn't some passive need. It's an active engine for growth. Especially when we're young, it's the thing that motivates us to study a little harder, practice a little longer, and just strive to be the best we can possibly be. Okay, so that all sounds pretty great, right? This positive force pushing us forward. But of course, life's never that simple. This simple hunger for love doesn't exist in a bubble. It eventually collides with the messy reality of other people, which brings us to the complications. Yeah, this is where things start to get tricky. It's that point where your personal need for love and attention starts to rub up against the needs and priorities of everyone else around you. All of a sudden, there's competition. We start hiding our flaws and only showing our best side. You see it between parents and kids when love gets tested by a little bit of rebellion. The source gives some perfect real-world examples from marriage. A husband's super important business golf game clashes with his wife's religious meeting. A mom's trip conflicts with her son's final exams. These are those everyday, real-world collisions of love. And this leads us to what I think is a brilliant insight here. Love isn't some prize you win at the end. It's a life problem set. It's like this incredibly challenging assignment that every single one of us gets, and we have to figure out how to solve it. And what's really wild is how this whole problem scales up. It's not just about individuals or families. You see the exact same dynamics play out in big organizations. Just think about it. A movement usually starts with this pure, passionate vision, a kind of love for a cause. But as it gets bigger and bigger, that original passion starts clashing with the cold, hard realities of trying to manage a large group of people. You can see the tension right here. The initial pure intention is all about passion, freedom, and direct action. But as the organization grows, you need rules, you need structure, you need, well, bureaucracy. And what began as this simple, beautiful act of love now requires administration, which can feel like a total betrayal of the original spirit. And in these complex systems, human nature starts to creep in. Ego, jealousy, they start to emerge. You can imagine the early members who sacrificed everything feeling pushed aside by new experts. That simple, unifying love just gets all tangled up in the complexities of being human. So if that simple, pure love isn't enough to handle all this complexity, what's the answer? Well, our source argues that love itself has to evolve. It has to mature. This brings us to a really pivotal concept, forgiving love. This is not just passive affection. This is love combined with wisdom and judgment. It's the ability to see someone's mistake, a failure at work, a friend's thoughtless comment, and to separate the person's essence from their flawed action. You address the mistake without condemning the person. And that insight is so powerful. I mean, think about it. It's pretty rare for a stranger to say, I love you, but it's almost unheard of to hear someone say, I forgive you, especially in a work setting. This is the higher, much more challenging path of love. And that brings us to the final stage, where love faces its ultimate test. This is where it confronts its direct opposites. Now, we often think of hatred as love's biggest enemy, and in a lot of ways it is. But our source points to an even deeper, more insidious foe, jealousy. See, hatred is often an external enemy you can see, but jealousy, that's an internal poison. It's that awful feeling of resentment that comes from comparison, and honestly, it's the seed from which so much hatred actually grows. The speaker in our source shares this really powerful personal story. He realized his own jealousy was just poisoning his life, making him unhappy and resentful. So he made a conscious choice. Instead of envying people who were more skilled, he would actively admire them. And he says that one simple mental shift completely transformed his life and his relationships, allowing him to befriend and learn from the very people he used to resent. And that just reveals such a profound truth, doesn't it? The final, greatest victory for love isn't one against some external enemy out there. It's one inside ourselves, in the battle against our own jealousy. Which leads us to the source's ultimate conclusion. It's the idea that without this higher form of love, a love that can forgive and overcome jealousy, then all of our actions, all our words, all our accomplishments are in the end meaningless. They're ultimately nothing. And so we're left with that question. If love is the fundamental problem set of life, then all of these stages, the hunger, the complications, the need for forgiveness, they are the questions on our own personal test. The only real question left is, how will you solve yours?
Hello and welcome. Today we're going to break down the worldview of a really influential modern leader, getting into his perspective on time, on meaning, and, believe it or not, the afterlife. And it all kicks off with just one number.
30,000. That's it. This leader we're looking at today says this is pretty much the number of days you get in your entire life, if you're lucky.
So he throws this question out there, and it's meant to frame his whole philosophy. Because, think about it, if your time is that limited, then every single day suddenly becomes a huge deal. It's meant to totally shake up how we live our lives. Okay, so let's dive into this idea. He calls it the 30,000-day clock. And yeah, it's pretty much designed to be a massive wake-up call for all of us.
You know, his point is that when you're young, time feels like it's going to last forever. But he says after you hit 30, it's like a ball rolling down a hill. It just picks up speed. Every day is like a single grain of sand you can never get back, slipping through that hourglass, which makes the time you have left just unbelievably precious. So with this clock ticking away, he then turns his focus to what he sees as the big distractions of our world, these illusions that make us waste all that precious time. And for a perfect example, he points straight at the entertainment industry. You know, we see the stars, the glamour, the whole thing, and we're sold this fantasy that fame and fortune could be ours too. But his whole point is that this is a really powerful and really misleading illusion. And here comes the reality check. He claims the actual odds of making it big as a star are something closer to 1 in a million. I mean, talk about a splash of cold water, right? It's a universe away from the dream so many people are buying into. Then he zooms out and points to a second illusion, but this time it's on a national level. He talks about Japan's drop from being #1 in global competitiveness back in 1990 all the way down to a much, much lower ranking today. For him, this is a huge cautionary tale about a nation getting caught up in the illusion of its past glory and not realizing the world has moved on. So, okay, if the modern world is just packed with these illusions, what are you supposed to do? Where do you find real meaning? Well, according to this leader, the answer isn't out there somewhere. It's in here. And it all starts with a quest to find your true calling. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. He takes this common Japanese word, tenshoku. A lot of the time, it just means changing your job. But he totally flips it and gives it this huge spiritual meaning. It's about finding the one mission, the one purpose your soul was actually put on this earth to do. And he doesn't just leave it at that as some vague idea. No, he lays out a really clear game plan.
It's all about actively expanding your world, studying everything you can, trying new things, meeting different kinds of people, traveling, and then you pull all of that together to figure out the one unique thing you're here to do.
And all of this search for a calling, it leads straight to the absolute heart of his entire worldview. A claim that, if you believe it, changes literally everything.
He draws a very clear line in the sand here. On one side, you've got the standard modern view, where physical beings, the mind is just the brain, and when you die, that's it, game over. But on the other side is his claim, and he says it with total conviction. The afterlife is real. Not maybe, not possibly. For him, it's a 100% certainty.
Wow. I mean, this quote just says it all, doesn't it? It shows his complete and total conviction. It's such a bold, confident challenge. He's basically saying, I'm so sure about this that if I'm wrong, come find me after you die and we'll talk.
So, you might be asking, what's his evidence for this? Well, he points to his own work. He says he's conducted over 700 public spiritual readings and channelings, and for him, these are proof positive, direct demonstrations of this reality that most of us can't see.
All right, so let's connect the dots here. How does this core belief in an afterlife translate into, well, a mission, a purpose for his followers here and now? So here's the big takeaway. For him, this knowledge isn't just for your own personal peace of mind. No, it actually puts a responsibility on your shoulders. If you believe in the afterlife, you now have a duty to help other people who are, lost in the material world. You have to guide them to a truth that he says will literally decide the fate of their soul.
And this is the grand finale, his final, powerful call to action. He's telling his followers that their work isn't just some small thing. He's tasking them with pushing open a doorway to a whole new future for all of humanity, a future built on spiritual truth and hope.
And that brings us right back to where we started, with that 30,000-day clock. So it leaves us with a really big question to chew on. If you really, truly believed that your time on Earth was just the first chapter of a much, much longer story, how would that change the value of today?
All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are digging into something, well, pretty huge. It's a declaration from a Japanese speaker who says he's got the answer not just for his own country, but for, the entire planet. And his whole vision kicks off with one heck of a statement. Wow. Yeah, you heard that right. He kicks things off by saying that the savior, 2,500 years after Buddha, is back. And he's in Japan. I mean, that is a powerful way to start, right? It sets the stage for something that's not just global, but maybe even cosmic. So what's this all about? What does he actually mean by that? So, okay, this isn't just some abstract spiritual thought. He's presenting this as the foundation for a real mission. He's actually framing this whole thing as the launch of a new world religion, one that starts in Japan. And it has a huge job to do, basically to save the Earth from itself. And the sheer scale of this claim, it's just mind-blowing. He's saying this isn't just the return of a savior like Buddha, but it's also the second coming of Christ. This new world religion, he claims it's the parent of Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam. The whole goal is to pull humanity back from the brink of disaster and start a whole new age of compassion. But look, to really get his solution, you've got to first understand the problem he's trying to solve, and it all starts at home in Japan. Okay, so when it comes to Japan, the speaker does not mince words. He is incredibly blunt. He actually uses this one powerful metaphor to paint a picture of a nation that he believes is in a deep crisis, a nation that's completely lost its way. And here it is. This one image really nails his whole critique. A jellyfish. Think about it. No backbone, no real structure, it just kind of drifts wherever the current takes it. He's asking, has Japan become like that? Just floating around with no foundation, no direction. And he's saying this isn't just some philosophical debate. No, this has real, tangible consequences.
So let's look at the symptoms he's pointing to. He says this missing spiritual backbone is the reason for Japan's weak foreign policy, for its failure to lead on the world stage, even with all its economic power. He even calls the values being taught in schools pathetic. And all of this, he says, leads straight to real social problems, things like classroom collapse and bullying. So what's the root cause? Where does this all come from?
Well, according to him, it all boils down to this. A nation that doesn't respect religion is basically no different from a society of animals. It's just focused on getting through the day, food, survival, with zero higher purpose, no understanding of who we really are. And this is what leads him to what he calls the single most important truth that we've all forgotten. All right, now we're getting to the absolute heart of his entire worldview. And he's very clear on this. What he's about to say isn't a belief system, it's not an opinion. He presents it as an objective, undeniable fact, like a scientific law, about what it means to be human.
And this is it. This is the whole shebang. The speaker's definition of a human being is this. We are spiritual beings, eternal souls, who are just temporarily living inside a physical body to have an experience here on Earth. For him, this isn't just some nice idea. It's the fundamental, non-negotiable truth of our existence. The problem? He says modern society teaches us the exact opposite.
This really lays out the two opposing views, doesn't it? On one side, you have his truth, we're eternal spiritual beings. And on the other, you have what he calls the falsehood that's pushed by schools and elites, the idea that we're just material stuff, that life is all just a big accident. He's convinced that this materialist view is what turns a nation into a directionless, drifting jellyfish. And for him, trying to argue against our spiritual nature is just, well, it's completely absurd. And you gotta hear this analogy. It really shows you how dead certain he is. He says that arguing against our spiritual nature is like saying hydrogen and oxygen combine to make oil. It just flies in the face of objective fact. See? For him, it's not a philosophical debate at all. It's like denying basic chemistry. And this conviction, he says, comes from decades of his own research. 100%. He is 100% certain. He says that after 30 years of his own research, he knows for a fact that the spiritual world and the afterlife are real. No question. He even says that every single one of us will find this out for ourselves when we die, and adds that he's never met a single soul in the afterlife who came back to tell him he was wrong. Okay, so if the problem is a jellyfish nation that's forgotten what it truly is, what's the fix? Well, the last part of his message lays out a really clear step-by-step plan to install that missing backbone. And here's the blueprint. It's built like a pyramid, you know? At the very bottom, the foundation that holds everything up is religion. From that solid religious base, you build the pillars of morality. Then, that shared morality creates a strong national spirit. And it's only when you have all of that, in that order, that you get what he calls a strong nation with a real backbone. And just like that, he brings it right back to that jellyfish metaphor. His mission, when you boil it all down, is to basically perform spiritual surgery on his country, to install the spine that he's so sure is missing. But, and this is a big but, he points out that this message lands very differently in Japan than it does in other parts of the world. Just look at this contrast. It's pretty stark. He says that in places like Uganda and Nepal, his talks are actually aired on national TV. But back home in Japan, he says the media there thinks it's unethical to broadcast religious ideas. For him, this is a perfect example of the problem he's trying to fix, a society that's actively trying to keep religion at arm's length. Because ultimately, in his worldview, you can't be neutral. There's no middle ground. He argues that any society, any person, any media company that rejects the divine, as he calls it, is automatically, by default, siding with the demonic. And that choice, he warns, is pushing the entire nation toward a hellish world. And that really brings us to the end of this deep dive. Now, for the speaker, religion is the clear, undeniable answer. But the core question he's raising is something that challenges all of us, no matter what we believe. What is the core, the spiritual, moral, or philosophical glue that holds a country together? What truly is the backbone of a nation? It's a heck of a question to think about. Thanks for joining me.
Today, we're jumping into a really unique religious doctrine, one that claims its founder isn't just a teacher, but is actually the consciousness of our entire planet.
So what does it actually mean to believe in an Earth God? Well, we're digging into a lecture from the leader of a spiritual movement that tackles this exact question. And what it reveals is a belief system that's been shifting and changing for decades.
Okay, so here's the absolute core of it. They call this consciousness El Cantare. And the teaching is that this isn't just some spirit or a guide, it's the literal God of Earth. Which, of course, raises the big question, why make a declaration like that right now?
To get that, we've got to rewind a bit. We need to look at how this belief system evolved over the last 24 years and kind of the growing pains it went through.
So for a long time, almost a quarter of a century, the movement built its following by channeling messages, but not from one single source, from a whole bunch of different spirits,
Historical figures, spiritual masters. And this worked. It brought in people from all kinds of different backgrounds.
But here's the problem, and this is where it gets really interesting. That diversity started to work against them. The speaker calls it a centrifugal force, like a spinning ride that pushes everything outwards. The teachings were getting pulled in so many different directions that they were at risk of just fragmenting. They needed something to pull it all back to the center, a centripetal force.
And that is where the Earth God concept comes in. The whole idea of Alcantara was introduced to be that central gravitational point. It's the one single belief designed to pull everything else into orbit around it. So once you have this central figure, this founder, you run into a new problem. How are people supposed to see the divine in a living, breathing human being? This is one of the most fascinating parts of the whole teaching.
And the speaker doesn't shy away from this at all. The argument is, essentially, that people who are alive at the same time as the founder, well, they're just too close to see what's really going on. They can't see the forest for the trees, so to speak.
And to explain this, he uses a really powerful example. Jesus. He points out that the disciples who actually knew Jesus, who walked with him, they saw a man who was persecuted, who was betrayed, and who was ultimately executed alongside common criminals. They saw the human struggle. But then, look at the Jesus people believe in now. People who never met him. They see the resurrected Christ, the Son of God. It's a completely different picture. And the lecture argues that the exact same thing will happen with Alcantara. The real understanding comes later.
So it's this incredible paradox, right? The teaching says that being there in person, seeing the human side of the founder, is actually a disadvantage. It gets in the way of seeing their true divine self. It's like you need distance, generations of distance, to get the real picture.
Okay, so with that idea in mind, that the true form is only seen later, the doctrine then zooms way, way out. We're talking about a cosmic history that spans hundreds of millions of years to explain where this Earth God actually comes from.
So according to the teaching, Alcantara isn't the first. This is actually the third time the Earth God's consciousness has come down to the planet. And the first two happened on a mind-boggling timescale.
So let's go back, way back. Over 300 million years ago, the first descent happened. This being was called Alpha, and the mission was to create a unified set of values on a very young Earth, because you had souls from here mixing with souls from other planets. Alpha's job was basically to prevent a giant cosmic culture clash.
Then, fast forward to about 150 million years ago, the second descent, Elohim. By this point, humanity had evolved, and a spiritual hell was starting to form. So Elohim's job was different. It was to teach the difference between good and evil, light and darkness, to really draw that line in the sand to help guide our spiritual growth.
Okay, so you have Alpha and Elohim. This whole epic backstory isn't just for show. It's used to set the stage for right now. It explains why the third incarnation is here and what's at stake for all of us today.
And according to the lecture, the stakes are incredibly high. Humanity is apparently facing two massive, simultaneous threats. First, a global clash of values. Think of it as a new kind of Cold War. And second, the idea that extraterrestrial civilizations are on the verge of deciding whether or not they need to step in and manage our affairs.
And this is the whole point. This is why it all matters. The doctrine claims that whether or not a civilization based on Alcantara's teachings can succeed is the one thing that will decide our future. It's the linchpin for how we handle both of these massive global crises.
And the choice is pretty stark. It's presented as two very clear paths. Path 1, the Alcantara civilization succeeds. If that happens, Earth gets to keep its independence, and the ETs just keep watching from a distance. Path 2, it fails, and if that happens, the warning is that intervention from space becomes unavoidable, leading to chaos and humanity pretty much losing control of its own destiny.
Which brings us back to this really tricky question at the heart of it all. If the true form of this belief, of this leader, can only really be seen by people in the future, how are followers supposed to navigate the here and now? It's a massive challenge of faith, trying to believe in something that, by its own definition, you can't fully see yet.
So what if the creator of humanity decided to give a speech from the Tokyo Dome? It's an extraordinary claim, and it's exactly what we're diving into today. A religious leader has come forward saying he's returned to guide a world that's on the brink of a massive choice. We're going to break down his message, piece by piece, to really understand the prophecy he laid out for our times. Let's get into it.
Here's how we're going to walk through this. We'll start with his incredible claim about who he really is. Then, we're going to journey into the secret, cosmic history of humanity, as he tells it. That backstory sets the stage for a modern global crisis, which he frames as the true battle for our future, and it all builds to what he calls the divine choice facing every single one of us. Okay, so right out of the gate, the speaker sets up some immense stakes. He's not just offering suggestions. He claims he's here as a guide for the entire human race. And he's speaking now because he believes we've hit a critical fork in the road, one that will decide our very future. He actually kicks things off by asking the audience this question. It's a way of immediately positioning himself as someone with unique, global authority. It's a really bold rhetorical move, you know? It's designed to frame his words as totally singular in their reach and importance, basically implying that no one else on the planet has the standing to deliver this kind of message. And to back up that claim to global authority, he points to the numbers. His speech wasn't just happening in the Tokyo Dome, it was being broadcast live to 3,500 locations all over the world. He also brings up the fact that he's published over 2,200 books. For him, these figures aren't just stats, they quantify the incredible scope of his mission and his influence. And this is the foundation for everything else he's about to say. He claims he is Alpha, the original creator god who first put life on Earth. And the reason he's back now? He says our civilization is staring down the one choice that will determine its survival or its extinction. Now, to justify a claim that huge, the speaker argues we first have to understand a history that's way, way older than what science tells us. He lays out this cosmic backstory that basically tries to reframe everything we think we know about where we came from. The timeline he presents is just staggering. He claims humanity's origins don't go back thousands of years, but 300 to 400 million. And within just the last million years, he says there's been a cycle of 7 major civilizations that have risen and then fallen. We are the 7th. And according to him, we're now standing on the very same cliff edge that destroyed all the others. His origin story gets even more specific. He claims humanity didn't just evolve from one single source. Nope. Instead, he says he created us from 3 totally distinct groups. First, there were beings who were materialized directly from spirit into physical form. Then, there were beings from other universes who came here and adapted to Earth. And finally, a third group of hybrid beings who were genetically engineered to thrive in this environment. So, from this massive cosmic history, the speaker suddenly pivots to a very specific, very modern crisis. He points to the nuclear threat from North Korea and says this isn't just another geopolitical problem, it is the single greatest test facing our entire civilization. In his analysis, this crisis didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was the result of 2 big missed opportunities. First, he points back to 1994, claiming the Clinton administration was about to strike, but then back down because they were afraid of over 1 million casualties. Then you fast forward to 2008, when he says the Obama administration was just too distracted by the global financial crisis to act. All of which, he argues, has led us right here, to this moment, a third and final chance to make a decision. The result of all this inaction, as he sees it, is that the world, and specifically the United States, has been backed right into a corner. He frames the situation as this unavoidable choice, a choice with profound, civilization-altering consequences no matter what happens. And here is the choice, just as he presents it. It's a tough one. On one hand, if the U.S. takes military action, he predicts North Korea will collapse, but it will come at the terrible cost of many, many lives. On the other hand, if the U.S. does nothing, he says America will just forfeit its status as a superpower, and the world will lose its global leader, which would create a huge power vacuum. A truly stark binary. But the speaker argues that this whole North Korean dilemma is really just a symptom of a much, much larger conflict. He believes this isn't about one nation versus another, it's an ideological war for the very soul of the planet. He defines this struggle as a global battle between 2 fundamentally opposed systems. On one side, you have what he calls socialist totalitarianism, and on the other, you have freedom and democracy. For him, every single geopolitical event, including this crisis, is just another skirmish in this much bigger war. To illustrate the difference, he uses this really stark analogy about press freedom. In the USA, he says, a critical news anchor might annoy the president. In Japan, they'd probably get invited to dinner to talk it out. But in Russia, he claims, they'd be assassinated. In China, they'd be jailed or purged. And in North Korea?
Well, a TV station that's critical of the leader simply could not exist in the first place. He then uses this vivid comparison to pose a really direct question to the audience. He asks, knowing these different outcomes, which of these countries would you choose to be reborn into? He argues the answer to that question reveals a universal human desire for freedom, and that therefore points to which system is more aligned with a just divine order. And this is what leads us to his ultimate conclusion. The choice facing the United States and the world isn't just political or military. He frames it as a spiritual test for all of humanity, one that's being overseen by a higher power. This quote really gets to the heart of his entire argument. He believes that things like patriotism and national interest, they aren't the highest law. The ultimate standard is divine justice. A nation, he says, only has the right to defend itself if it's a nation that God himself would see as worthy of defending. So ultimately, he's saying this isn't about choosing the lesser of two evils. It's about humanity demonstrating that it has the ability to choose the path that aligns with these divine principles of freedom and justice. And in his view, the fate of our entire civilization is hanging on whether we get this choice right. Which, of course, leaves a really big, nagging question, right? If every single nation is flawed, and even the democratic ones have, in his view, lost their connection to the divine, how can anyone be certain about the right path forward when the stakes are literally the end of the world as we know it? And this is his final and maybe his most provocative answer. He tells the audience that in this moment of ultimate confusion, of ultimate hesitation, they should listen to his words. And why? Because he claims these are the words of Alpha, the very being who has guided humanity since its creation 300 million years ago. A truly profound claim to authority, and definitely a final thought to leave us with.